Welcome, everyone, to Reclamation, a beEmboldened initiative where we focus on living out freedom from spiritual abuse. Many times I have gotten asked the question, do leaders ever leave? Do they ever repent? Is there any hope for change at a higher level than on the personal level, which of course is still significant? My answer is always yes, and I'm confident in that because I've met them. Not all of them. I've met some of them. And one of these brave individuals is Charles, someone I have significant respect for. I have had the honor of coming to know, and I've been looking forward to introducing you all to him. So with that, I want to get our conversation started with Charles, our special guest today, and ask you, Charles, how would you describe the religious system you were involved with?
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you for having me, Naomi. It's nice to chat with you again. I've always enjoyed the times we've been able to interact with each other. So, and you do such great work and help so many people. How would I describe the group that I come from? Well, boy, I mean, how much time do you have, right? So I would describe the group that I come from as a pseudo-Christian doomsday cult, obsessed with the end of days, widely twisted out of scripture, following the teachings of William Branham. It was called The Message. I've been pretty upfront about where I come from over the years. So that was it. You know, it's high control. I mean, very high control, very isolated group, very limited interactions with outsiders, very stringent on doctrine, on controlling people at every level and their thoughts and their behaviors and their emotions. So yeah, I would describe where I come from as a cult.
Yeah. And for anyone who's familiar with The Message, anyone who's listening who has heard of it, you would probably easily agree it checks all of the boxes of any kind of model that we would want to hold it up against. So I definitely second that. Some of you may be aware that I came from a splinter group. There's so many splinter groups, but my dad had been introduced with the founder of The Message, as many were. And when he passed away, he kind of thought he was kind of carrying it forward, so to speak, and then was the new prophet of the hour, as it was called. So maybe you've come across some of that with my story as well. So I'm going to get into, we're not going to so much get into the specifics of The Message today. I'm happy to link something with more information. Charles actually has a channel that is great. If you're wanting to tune into some things, we have, a friend who is great to follow. So I might link some of those resources for all of you. Today, we more so want to focus on the experience that Charles had with this group, including being in it, as well as his exit and what it's been like after. So with that being said, how would you describe yourself at the time of becoming involved? So were you born into it? Were you brought into it? How did that come to be?
So I was born into it, and I would have been the fourth generation of my family in it. My grandparents and great-grandparents actually converted into The Message while William Branham was still living in the very early days, of the movement, right in the headquarters area, and some of my other family from the international groups. But my family came into it very early. Every member of my family that I have ever had much interaction with was in the cult, and you don't get any more immersed than that. So, yeah, so I was in it my whole life, basically, yes. And up until, I'm past the midway point of my life if I live an average lifespan, so the majority of my life will have been in it and really not in anything else, so.
Are you younger than me?
I think we're the same age, but God have mercy. I hope we live to be old people, but average. I'm over halfway.
Wait, but do I live longer? I think I live longer.
Women usually live longer than men, right? Yeah, so you got it.
I don't know if that's a goal I have or not, but I definitely would prefer that my husband, that I get to go first, though. I don't want to have to live through the loss of him. But anyway, I've tried to make that as a deal. We'll see how it pans out.
Yeah. I think I've heard your story. I think you got out maybe about 15 years before I did. So good for you.
I think so. Yeah. Well, it took some things to get me there as well. That did not come easily. It took a lot of people dying, actually, for me to get out. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't claim anything, that's for sure, for myself based on that. But so growing up and it being born into it, I definitely resonate with that. Fourth generation. I mean, that is, and everyone being a part of it. So, I mean, that is full indoctrination. I mean, it's everything.
Yeah. I have never in my life had a friend or outside of the group. Never. We were, never. So I knew people, we had acquaintances outside, you might put it that way, but friend or any sort of a relationship. I don't even know that I have even been to the home of someone outside of it, when I left. Like it was that, yeah. So, we're in it, and we're in it deep.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So what would you describe as the main tenets of leadership? Like, how did leadership function in this organization?
Oh, goodness. Well, that's a really good question. So the leadership in the group was there to guide and perfect the people. So in a sense, when it's almost like a noble calling. There's the special elite group of leaders who are there to ensure that everyone makes it into the rapture, because we're all obsessed with the end of days. The way message theology works, they don't use the word theology. Theology is evil, but what normal people would call message theology, we're chasing the rapture. We believe Jesus Christ came back in 1963 in some form or another. We had a vague spiritual way, and after that spiritual return, he was getting us all ready for us to go with him in the rapture, which was never more than a year or two away for 60 years in a row. And so the whole time, this group of preachers are empowered to perfect everyone, to get them so that they're, equipped to go in the rapture. So the whole thing of leadership is getting the people ready for the rapture. And so that's the program for the true believers anyway in it.
Well, and then you found yourself in leadership at some point. Would you mind sharing about that, including what age you were, how that actually came to be? Let's start there, and then we can move into what was that dynamic once you were in leadership.
Oh, goodness, Naomi. So some of these things, I have never really talked about it in a public sort of way since I left the message. So some of this will be the first time, that I would talk about this. But so in the 1990s, our leader had set a doomsday date that the rapture was supposed to happen, right? And he died 6 months before the date happened. And in the time after he died, everything just kind of went very chaotic. There were many splits and divisions over trying to figure out how to correct his math, right? Because obviously the end still had to be right around the corner. So they had to figure out some way to correct the math. And so as all of that happened, basically all the other men who you might count as apostles, we had apostles, senior apostles. And so all these different apostles had different ways to fix the math. And of course, none of them agreed on the right way. So everything split up at that point, and which was very sad. Our group, so just in terms of the message, I was from the second oldest message church. We were the second church. We were the original sister church of the Branham Tabernacle. And our leaders and our people were there from the beginning. We even had some of the founding leaders' family would come to our church, right? So, and we were all intermarried. And so when everything broke up that way, we started to, we would lose our family, right? We lost large parts of our families because when you split, the other people they're the devil, and you can never see or talk to them ever again, right? Because their leader added up the math a different way than our apostle did. So, it just it started to get really ugly. We lost a whole lot of leadership at that point, and we believed in a certain ministry model, and as that happened, we didn't have enough preachers anymore. So I had been helping, I don't know, I would say not in senior leadership, but in a intermediate leadership level for a number of years from the 90s. And then as I came into the 2000s, I think it was, after all that had happened, I was asked to take on a preaching role at the church, a teaching role. At that point, I had already been involved in probably what normal people outside of our cult would call like internet ministry and media ministry. And I was doing all kinds of things that normal churches would call ministry. But in the cult, that's not you're only minister if you're behind the preacher, behind the platform preaching. So I had been doing a lot of like intermediate kind of things. But the pastor who was the apostle, which would have been our direct successor to William Branham, right? The senior leader of our international fellowship asked me to come on as associate pastor of the flagship church of the second oldest sect of the Message. And so I entered into that role at that stage. And that's how that happened. Now, why? I mean, I had been there my whole life. I had great, in the sense of the cult, I had everything going for me, right? I mean, I had great pedigree, right? I had, all of my family. There's not a lot of families that go all the way back to the beginning, right? But my family did. I had been, I don't want to say, I hate to brag or anything, but I had been a tremendous help to the church, putting together very many things that had given us, internet presence and everything. We had internet and live broadcasts of our church services in the late 90s, okay? Before there was even YouTube, like we were cutting edge. And we had brought, our international fellowship would watch the flagship church online all over the world. And so anyways, I had done a lot, and it's not humble to say you're humble, but I never bragged or anything like that. And I just worked away quietly and tirelessly. And I think they respected that. And they had learned that I would keep the secrets, right? Different things I had seen. I never ratted people out or anything like that. I had always kept the secrets. And so I think that is part of why I got invited into to leadership. And then, of course, that's like the superheroes of our, of our world is the preachers, right? And you're invited to be the superhero of your world. I mean, that's, that makes you feel good, right? So anyways,
sure.
That's how that happened. Yeah.
Right. Well, and in that kind of environment, so please know, everyone, we're not saying that it should be the superheroes in real Christianity, but yeah, these kinds of environments, it's incredibly prestigious. And the actual church you were being asked to be a leader in was incredibly prestigious. And so, of course, and you had already been involved. I mean, it makes perfect sense that you would accept it. Now, just as a technicality, was this full-time, or were you still working full-time and this was something you did in addition to?
Oh, I worked full-time and I did this. I basically had 2 full-time jobs. Yeah.
Right.
But I had been that way for many years. I worked a full-time job, and then I did a full-time thing for the church as well. Because besides just the preaching, as I took that on, like I said, I continued to take care of all of the digital media, all the internet outreach. And we published a magazine, newspaper type document of all the teachings of our church, right? That went out to, again, mailed to the International Fellowship. I became the editor of all of our literature. I oversaw a lot of the connections with the international groups. And yeah, I mean, it was a lot. It really was a full-time job. Just it was probably more of a full-time job doing that stuff than my actual job, to be honest with you. Yeah.
And you said that you had also proven that you had kept the secrets, different things that you had seen.
Yes.
And so, without getting into the specifics, I know that there's times that you have in different ways on your own channel and things. But for the goal of our conversation today, I'm more curious about how you reconciled the secrets at that time when you were stepping into leadership. How did you make that okay?
So I'll give one example. So working in the church office, I observed that our senior leaders were embezzling a large percentage of the money coming in, because I took care, of the computers that did the finances, and I was there when all the money was counted. Like, I visibly saw and heard what was happening, and I heard how the money should be directed, right? And so I knew that, but in the back of my mind, they had sold us a line as to why they were doing that, right? And we believed that, well, this man who's telling us to do that is God's anointed on earth, so it can't possibly be wrong, right? I mean, can God make a mistake, right? Is it really embezzlement if God's doing it? So you don't look at it that way. It's not. You can't do evil in the name of God. You can't do evil in the name of the cult, right? You can't abuse in the name of the cult. It's not possible. By definition, it cannot be abuse. It cannot be criminal. It cannot be, because it's God enacting all of it, and that's how you look at it. And you always assume there's something here I don't know, and they know, right? They've heard from God. Mm-hmm. God has come and told them this, right? And they're doing what God wanted them to do, and I just don't understand, right? I just don't understand. And you file it away.
Yeah. And I get that. It does make sense, because, I felt similarly about my dad. It's like, well, he can't be wrong about things in that area, at least. Like, I did know, he was abusive. I knew that there were issues with the abuse, like in the home. So I could draw that line. I think the only reason I could, though, was because I did go to public school and I had an outside world to a degree. That gave me a bit of a comparison point. But anything that he was speaking in regards to spirituality, it was the Lord speaking through him. And so you're right. Like, it couldn't actually be wrong. So somehow it was, well, I must just not understand, or someday maybe I will, or I'm not as spiritual, whatever it is, but somehow reconciling that to move forward. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah. Well, you continued first, how long were you in leadership? How many years?
Oh, goodness. Well, I was doing all the different things in some capacity of leadership for, I would say, 15-ish years, something along that line, maybe a little more than that. But I was actually I had preached for a while, but my actual role as the associate pastor, basically the second from the top in the group, was maybe 3 years before I left, roughly. So
okay.
So it was a gradual moving up the ranks, if you want to think of it like that.
Mm-hmm. How did you go from what you just shared as like how you kind of would reconcile things and make sense of it, to only 3 years later, which honestly is a pretty short period of time, to leaving?
Oh, goodness. So, you hear about like secret groups, like the higher up you go, the more secrets you learn. Mm-hmm. The higher I went, the more secrets I learned, Mm-hmm. And there was a number of things that happened that not any single one of them pushed me over the edge, but the cumulative weight of them all. I discovered some dark, ugly stuff, I just got to say. And I found out, our leaders had been involved in some dark, ugly things. And then I started to discover and then at first I think, well, maybe it's just these people around me. But then I started to discover, no, it was our prophet from the very beginning was involved in some of this dark stuff. And, that starts to shake things. And I started to find out that the core, so we believe Jesus came back in 1963, right? Well, I found out it was a hoax. I found out it was a hoax, Naomi. I mean, you've discovered it, right? Jesus didn't really come back in 1963. God have mercy.
Which is good. The Bible is actually true.
Right.
Yay.
But
we can still hang our hats on it, Charles.
I know, right? But I started to discover that it was a hoax, Naomi. And so that turns your world upside down, and you're trying to figure, okay, maybe just this piece is bad. Maybe just that piece, there's something still that I can salvage here. There's something still, and I'm like, well, maybe it's just our church had the wrong interpretation, and there's another sect of the message, there's another group out there that has it right, and I'll find the answers. So anyways, I had those questions in the back of my mind when I found out that, the stuff from 1963 was a hoax, and that our prophet had seriously deceived the people. So that started it. Then there was another thing that happened that I don't think this is another something I haven't talked about at all. I had an acquaintance in the message who I had known, for many years, and who was in another one of our affiliated churches. And he, through a series of events, ended up murdering his mother-in-law and his father-in-law and his wife, and then committing suicide. And he did all that in front of their 4-year-old daughter.
Oh.
And when that happened, that the whole circumstances, events around that kind of woke me up to something I had never really saw before. And I observed how everybody handled that situation. And I didn't like how I saw that situation handled. And suddenly I became aware, my God, there has been a string of suicides, my whole life. And I really came to realize that the message had been a contributing factor to what happened in that specific event. And subsequent to that, not even a year later, there was another suicide. And so at that point, I'm starting to wake up. I'm like, my God, this thing is killing people, right? And I'm behind the scenes, and when you're in the pew and you're, on that side of the curtain, there's things you can't see. But when you're behind the curtain, you can see what's going on, and you realize, oh my goodness, this is not right. It's not right, and so that woke me up, and suddenly, I could just see all of these people being harmed and hurt. And, in the position I was in, lots of people would come to me for counseling or for guidance, right? And so many people, Naomi, were suicidal. It would break your heart. Broke my heart. So many people. And I realized, my God, it's our religion that is doing this to these people, and so that's going on. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, eventually maybe I can change this from the inside. That was my thought. Maybe it's not the religion itself. Maybe it's just we got some bad other people and leaders, and over time, maybe we can reform this. That was my thought, as we started to go through that. And then I started to try to be reformative about those things, and it wasn't well received. It was not well received at all. And it was then I ended up the person with, getting the stick took to them, right? If you know what I mean. And so, that didn't go terribly well. And then I think the thing that really pushed me over the edge is we had, during COVID, the restrictions and everything in place. Well, we were also a faith healing cult, which, in addition to a doomsday cult, so we believed in faith healing. And we had at first followed all the COVID restrictions, right? And we'd kept the church say, we spaced everybody out and everyone wore masks and all that. And we went like 6 months and we didn't spread COVID in the church, which I think was pretty good, right? Mm-hmm. But then one of the other preachers decides it's time to, call COVID a scam or whatever. And he tells the people to, if you're sick, the right place is to come to church. Don't stay home and quarantine anymore, basically. Talked bad about all the COVID procedure or protocols, and all the sick people came to church that Sunday. The next Sunday, a week later, 168 people got COVID, the elderly being hospitalized. We had multiple fatalities. We had to close the church. And that really, when that happened, the pastor, nearly went too. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm getting ready to have to take over this thing, right? And I'm talking to the pastor, trying to figure out, what to do. He's not well. We finally get the church back. The pastor's still out, and this other preacher tells everybody that another certain person in the church, they recommended hospitalizing her, but they're going to deny her medical treatment. Like the church, like he and his family are actively involved in denying medical treatment to this mother, who's his woman, who's his mother. And she died. She subsequently died, Naomi, from them denying her medical treatment. And before she died, that was it for me. I'm like, you're killing people. Like, you're killing people. And I couldn't take that anymore. And so I left. At that point, I confronted them over it, and they didn't like being confronted over, the fact that they had killed people. I mean, they were killing people, Naomi. And they didn't like the fact that I confronted them over that. And they all started to attack me nonstop. I mean, they started to attack me. And I left at that point. And I didn't stop believing the religion at that point, believe it or not. But I realized something is seriously wrong here. I just got to get out of here. And so from that point, I left, and I never went back. I never listened to him again. That was my exit, and those were the things that led up to it. There's so much more I could say, but I think those are kind of key events in it all.
And when you left, did you have a conversation with anyone, or do you just Irish goodbye? I'm out.
So I had confronted the man who was in the process of killing his mother, and who he did kill. I mean, she did die, and I don't know why. There's things I can't. I have not tried to even process through and try and understand why it happened, but for some reason, another one of the deacons in the church decided the pastor's, he's not well. He's basically needs hospitalized himself, but goes to him and convinces the pastor that I don't believe the message anymore, right? And so they set up this meeting, and they ambushed me. I didn't know they were going to do it. They ambushed me in this meeting, and they're all coming down on me, right? Because I told that man to stop killing his mother, right? And what do you do, Naomi? I have no idea what you do. So, I just had to leave, right? So after that meeting, I didn't go back to another church service after that, right? I didn't go back again after that, and they immediately started really ugly harassment stuff. And it's actually the harassment that I decided, well, I can't even go back. My goodness. I mean, what in the world are they going to do to me, And I didn't even have to guess, because, I've been there long enough. I know what they do to people, right? And I was like, I can't handle this. I cannot take what they're getting ready to do to me. And, I'm not going to endure that and sit here and pretend like it's okay that we've killed all these people, So yeah, that was it.
And I would imagine, knowing what I do of the message, as well as just groups like this, that when the outcome of them claiming COVID was a scam and 168 or whatever, I'm not sure exactly how many you said. Did I get that right? Was it 168?
Yeah, 168 got COVID. Yeah, the very next week. And I know because I was keeping track of them all, and the church was very tight knit, and I even still have a list of all their names. Yeah, and because I was like I would go visit people in the hospitals too and stuff. So that was part of why I was collecting all their names. But yeah,
right. I would assume, again, knowing what I do with these groups, that there was no apology of, oh my word, we were wrong.
Nothing. No.
Yeah, because we never hear that.
I shattered, and when I confronted him, I shattered everything's supposed to be perfect, right? Everything's perfect. The leaders are always right. There's never any mistakes. I shattered that, and I questioned the leaders, and you would think me being the second most senior leader, I could maybe do that, but no, you can't do that either, right? So, yeah, it all came crashing down very fast.
So then you step out of there. So you've stepped out of leadership then at this point. You're still mentally in the message. You're still believing it. And I mean, in theory, anyway, maybe you could have either started your own church and been in leadership or sought a different leadership position. How did you end up out fully versus re-immersing someplace else?
Oh, goodness, Naomi. So I don't think I can even put into words, the brokenhearted person I was at that moment. When I left there, I left everything. I didn't leave a role in leadership. I left my entire life. I lost in that event, I lost every friend I had ever had in my entire life. I lost almost my entire family, all of my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my grandparents. I lost all my family, and now I'm the devil, right? I lost, my reputation, right? They destroy your reputation. The stuff they do to a person that leaves is horrific. And I just, so, to even, I was much too brokenhearted to want to, to dare even try. I just was much too brokenhearted. The word that I have found that best describes that series of events, going through that wake up the word that best describes it is the word horror. Horror. Mm-hmm. Horror. It's indescribable horror to go through something like that, and it is. It never even, so many people had been harmed over the years there, and I had woke up to see all the harm that had been done. And the last thing I wanted to do, as I'm leaving, I'm thinking, okay, if I go try to start something else, guess what? I'm going to divide more people's homes, and I'm going to divide more. Like maybe maybe they're better off there. At least they have people and stuff. So I didn't want to break up homes and because that's what happens when people leave. If the husband leaves, well, they make the wife get a divorce. You lose your kids. It's really ugly when people try to leave. And so that was a big thing. It's like, it's not worth it, right? Like I don't even have the answer to what's right. So how could I try to start something when I know something's wrong here, but I haven't even figured out what's right? It wouldn't be right of me to try and take people in a direction that I don't even know quite yet what the right direction is, right? So that's where I was at that precise moment, when I left, and thinking of trying to figure out what to do next.
Mm-hmm. And for anyone, again, who's listening or watching, and this is maybe less familiar based on the experience that you had, the smear campaign from groups like this, they're thorough. Yeah. And so, to hear what you're saying, Charles, and I have some overlap in experience of it doesn't matter that you're family. Like, it doesn't matter what memories you have and what history you have. Like, you're done. You're just cut off. And it's not neutral. Like, you're worse than an unbeliever. Like, it's not this neutral thing. It's not well, maybe there's hope for you. It's like, no, you had exposure to the truth.
Yeah.
And you have turned away from it, and you're done. Period. And we need to pretend you never existed. Essentially, we need to move on.
You're going to get to go to the worst part of hell. You're going to get the worst torturous death that is possible, and that is you. And you are basically, you are the devil. You are the devil. You're the agent of the devil. Yeah. Yeah.
Moving forward from that point, you ended up fully exiting that worldview. So, punchline, everyone. I know we started this with he exits, so I don't feel like I'm really giving anything away. But can you talk a little bit about that process for us?
So if I understood right, the question was how I changed my worldview. Is that?
Yeah. So not being, because you exited, but you still believed in the message. How did you come to not?
Yes. So there was, before I left, I had started a deep investigation into everything based on questions that I was having. And I had access to, in my position, I had access to all of the records of the group. Like, I had all the records. I had everything. I had everything I needed in order to investigate. I had access to the eyewitnesses back to the very early days, right? I had everything. And I had been slowly trying to figure out where we made the wrong turn, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Okay, I was not prepared to throw everything away. I want to figure, okay, there's something good here, maybe. How do I retrace the steps? I want to figure out where we made the wrong turn. And so, and I just started that. And there were certain things. The biggest thing was I still had some tinge of possibility that Jesus really did come back in 1963. Mm-hmm. and so
dies hard.
I know there was one thread I had left that I had left. It's one of those things. It's like, I am up until that point. I'm like, I'm not going to look. That thread's there, and I'm not going to look. You know what I mean? Because I'm afraid what I might find if I cut the last thread. And so, after I, kind of gathered my strength after I had left, I'm like, I'm going to find out. I'm going to go look at this last thread. And essentially what it was is we believe that when Jesus had came back, he had given certain special revelations to William Branham. And the revelation of the 7 seals, basically. Mm-hmm. And before I left the message, I had found several of the 7 seals in a book that William Branham had read them out of in his sermons. But there were some of the seals I had not found, okay? And so I think, well, okay, maybe he got a couple of these from the angel or whatever.
He stole 3.
Yes, right? Hey, we still got 3, right? So I by that point, though, I knew I had figured out, if you look behind me, this is a recreation of William Branham's personal library. I was obsessed with the message. You know what I mean? This is original edition literature that he had in his own library. And it takes time to read books, right? Like, I have actually read like all of these books. And I found the rest of them. I found where he got the other 3 from. And once that was it, I mean, it's open and close. Okay. Not only did Jesus not come back and give us the special revelation, hey, the Jehovah's Witnesses had it in the 1800s. Oh boy, it's not so, should we all go be Jehovah's Witnesses now? No, obviously not. But like, that's, that's what you're going through your mind, right? It's like, so obviously we're not special. We just, William Branham just copied this stuff from people. Right. And so once I had, kind of got past, okay, nothing special happened in 1963 at all, right? Not only did Jesus not come back, there was no special revelation, nothing. Like everything about that was a hoax. And that's when my mind then opened to be able to actually question William Branham. And up to that point, William Branham was still sacrosanct. I would not question him directly. And so at that point, okay, I realized it's not just our leaders that made the wrong turn. The wrong turn had to be at least at William Branham on back. And so from there, I just kept tracing back and back and back, trying to figure out where we had made the wrong turn. And so that's how I kind of arrived, to subtract a whole lot of things from my worldview. Now, so this is a secret, but I'll tell you.
You're not just telling me, right?
Yes, yeah, I know. Okay. So I had a secret sin in the message, Naomi. Okay. When I was a teenager, 17, and I got my first car and I would drive to work in the morning, I would listen to a preacher on the radio, Naomi. And his name was Alistair Begg. You may have heard of him. Mm-hmm. And I occasionally listened to him on the radio. And I had always liked what he taught, because it seemed compatible, right? He never actually preached anything too much against what we believed, because we never preached the gospel, right? so it wasn't really, there was not, hilarious. He preached the gospel but I found myself, as I'm subtracting more and more and more, I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I think, maybe these guys had more than we thought they did. Maybe he really did have it right, and I was, obviously with all these books, I'm fairly well versed in what other people believe in, and I really kind of got to the spot where I really, there's one verse in the book of Romans that I really like, being justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath. We didn't believe that in the message. No, you being justified by his blood, you get to burn up in the tribulation. That's what we believed. And we believe, you need, you're from the message. It's a long string of stuff that you need to not burn up in the wrath to come. And, that just kind of started hitting home with me. Like, you know what, maybe Jesus was enough, right? And so anyways, I really got back to the point where I think where the message went wrong, it was a long way back. It's where we stopped thinking Jesus was enough to save us. And we started, we need to know the mysteries. We got to have the perfect life. We've got to find the perfect unity. And we're chasing all of this stuff, but we never really needed to do that. And then our leaders started killing people in the name of the religion, and because it was so important to have those things. And and so that's how I basically got back to Jesus. And then, once you've got some rock back under your feet rather than all that sand, then you can maybe start to rebuild your worldview. But it was not a quick, it took me a good year of constant, all my efforts for nearly a year that I could gather myself was in trying to figure that out. Because there's a lot, some people just could throw everything away and start over. I couldn't do that. I had to figure it out, right? I couldn't bring myself to just the doctrines, the teachings, and how to tie it back to Scripture, and everything from the message was so ingrained in me, right? And there's a certain logic to it all, and I had to find the flaws in the system, and to in order to rebuild my thoughts. And ultimately, I've arrived at the conclusion the only thing I needed to take the message apart was just the gospel, because I could dismantle the whole thing with just believing Jesus is enough to save you. You can just take the whole thing apart. It's amazing that it crumbles that easily, but it does. It does.
And coming from my own experience of what it's like when that realization hits, I want to ask you what it was like for you when you finally hit that point of, oh my goodness. And I mean, finally, as in all this work you put in, not like it took you so long, because honestly, you did it pretty fast, really, in the scheme of things and comparatively. I mean, this was things kept moving for you. And so when this clicks, what were you left with?
So I again, another just a personal thing. I for a long while, as I was going through that, I thought for sure that I have to understand all the mysteries. I've got to know all the I've got to figure out all the mysteries, right? And one day, I was just kind of laying about and feeling sorry for myself, and and how terrible everything had turned out. Basically the world was upside down, and I don't know why. I guess I could say I know why, but because God loves us, right? But I just started reciting John 14 to myself, right? And I don't know. Apparently, I have more of the Bible memorized than I thought, because as I left the message, I'll tell you the truth, I couldn't, for the longest while, I couldn't bring myself to actually open a Bible. I could read lots of it, but to open a Bible and read, all I could read was the message out of the Bible, right? And so I just couldn't open the Bible for the longest time. And so as I'm sitting there, in my mind, I start to quote John 14 to myself. And hey, I guess I had memorized John 14 somewhere. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. It's that verse. Hey, maybe it's not John 14. Holy cow, I guess I could have the chapter wrong, but in my head it's John 14. But anyways, this part where Jesus says, let not your heart be troubled. And as he goes down through there, he says, in my Father's house are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would have told you. And I realized, Jesus is talking about coming back to get us there, right? And he said, if we have him, we're going to be okay. And if we don't know all the rest, we're still going to be okay. And so that was like very enlightening to me, as I started to realize, I'm going to be okay if I don't figure it all out. Because if I have Jesus, it's going to be okay. And so what did that do? When that happened, then I did feel a whole lot better. And I started to feel a whole lot better after that. But up until then, I didn't feel very good about it, I'll tell you that. But when I really realized that I was going to be okay, and being okay to me, just I'm not going to go to hell, I'm not going to burn up in the worst part of hell because I have Jesus, right? Well, then, once you're past that, then you do feel so much better. Oh, man, you feel so much better because hell's a very real thing in this religion, and you don't want to go there. So it made a big difference for me.
How about in regards to leadership? So having been, gosh, I have a story, and I'm going to, in some way, level the playing field here, because I know I'm about to ask you a couple of tough questions, and I know you've said it's okay, and I know we've talked about it, but they are vulnerable questions, and I want to recognize that as I'm asking them. And when I look back, being the daughter of who we believe to be the prophet at that time, heralding Jesus's final coming, there were some missional-esque opportunities there. And that wasn't really the goal. I was more so really lonely and scared and had a lot of stuff bottled up. And there's one person specifically where I shared some of the truth about my family and kind of the duplicitous life I was leading and things like that. And I'll use this as an example where, gosh, I actually moved away like went to college and, which I wasn't supposed to do, especially a female, like you don't do that, but I did. I'm so rebellious, Charles. And so while I'm away, like she's still meeting with my mom. My mom was a lovely person. People love to meet with her. And years go by, I lose contact with this person who had been a friend. My mom's passed away, my dad's passed away, all of that. Well, she ends up joining the group. Not that long ago, got married. And I just think about, oh my goodness, like if I had just not introduced her, if I had just not, and that is something that I've needed to work through. And so from your perspective, from your experience of what you've journeyed through from creating the website and helping to, get the message out there, no pun intended, not really meant that way, get the message out there about the message. And then being in that leadership position, kind of honing in on that, how has that experience been for you, stepping out from all of it? The losses you've taken, the community, so many losses that you've taken, including your worldview and including the belief that all you had done was for the Lord. I mean, that was certainly your intention. And I do believe that counts for something. And yet to realize, like I did, oh my gosh, that wasn't actually true.
It is very challenging and something I've tried to be very careful with, because, like you say, well, you're in there. I mean, we had good motives. Hey, we thought we were getting people ready for the rapture, right? We thought they were saving their lives, and we were, the Apostle Paul says zeal, but not according to knowledge. That would, we were very zealous. And I mean, you're right. I mean, I baptized people into the message. I brought people into the message. Funerals were was really the only time we ever saw outsiders. So I had a really good evangelistic sermon for the funerals I took, and, would win people in. And
well, you had a lot of funerals. Was that a behind the scenes tactical plan?
Well, funerals, yeah. Funerals is where we picked up most of the new people. Yeah.
Oh my.
That's the only time we really, there's when else do we ever get in front of people on the outside, right? A funeral.
I know. It's just with all the indirect deaths going on. It's like, oh my goodness, was that a recruitment plan?
Oh man, maybe it was. Goodness, you gave me a thought there. Holy cow.
Not for you. I know it wasn't for you.
But yeah, you bring all the people, you do all that, and you realize that, your whole life has been, on the net, you have caused far, far more harm than good. And that's not easy to come to grips with now. No, that is. And I think that's another thing that keeps a lot of people trapped in there, because to wake up, especially the higher you go up in leadership, to wake up out of this, you have to be willing to not just admit that you believed a bunch of silly stuff, right? Because we believed a bunch of silly stuff, but we did all kinds of harm in the name of that silly stuff. Like, we did serious harm in the name of that silly stuff. And which, what do you do with that? Maybe we're, apparently you're a pretty bad person, right? You did a bunch of bad stuff, right? And so, that is very hard, I think, for people to admit about themselves, that not only we believe this silly stuff, but we did all kinds of terrible things in the name of this silly stuff, because we believed it. And zeal, but not according to knowledge. And, I don't know what to do with that. I don't even know if I have the right answers for some of that stuff. I kind of look at the example of Paul, maybe, but that's really the best I know. And it's very hard to come to grips with that. I think that's one of the hardest things. And I think that no matter where you come from in a movement like this, from the top to the bottom, you at some point become an accomplice to it, right? And I think though the higher you go into it, the more of an accomplice you become to it all. And in a personal sense, I think I try to forgive myself for everything that I did before I knew. But once I woke up, I say it's the things that happened after I woke up and I realized something is wrong. It was between that point and the time I left that I feel, you feel the worst for. Because in that time, you're truly bending your mind to do something is not right. And that's hard. It's hard to forgive oneself for those things. Yes.
Mm. And I think that can be the hardest forgiveness to give. I think at times maybe it can be easier to forgive others. I think we can know theologically that the Lord has forgiven us, that we're not beyond his forgiveness and his mercy and his grace. Like we're not. We can know that, right? We can read about it. And yet actually receiving it and forgiving ourselves, that can really be the toughest part. And I have seen at times in other kinds of relationships, not necessarily beEmboldened connected, but where that can really get in the way of making amends and moving forward. And I don't believe that where we sit right now having this conversation today, I don't think that's been the case for you. Ultimately, whatever it's been like exactly to get here. I don't think I've seen that. And I'm curious what you think. When you think about these concepts of repentance and forgiveness and making amends or reparations, restitution, whatever word we want to use, they're kind of all wrapped up, meaning similar things. What are your thoughts and what that's looked like for you?
No, in the message, and maybe I don't know that every message group is like this, but ours was. We worshipped the truth, right? The truth. We worship the truth, and we would do anything for the truth. We would die for the truth. And part of that chasing the truth is what, in that respect, I think it was the indoctrination of the cult that propelled even the path I took when I left, which is odd, isn't it? But it is. I was hunting. I was indoctrinated to, the truth at all costs. And so, as I went down that route, to find the truth, and as I uncovered the truth, how do you make amends for something like that? Like Zacchaeus, after he repented, he said, "Lord, I'll go make it right with everybody. I'll give them their money back." Well, what can I give back, right? And as I thought about it, the only thing I could give back would be to tell them the truth, right? And that's, I don't know. I don't have anything else to give them to make it right. I told them things that were not true, so I'd do my best to tell them the truth. And so I undertook. So after I was out for I had left. I probably had exited about a year and a half after my exit, maybe slightly more than that, maybe a year and 3/4 after my exit. I started to decide I'm going to tell them all the truth. And by telling them the truth in that way, I will have in some way tried to correct having told them all the lies about the message all of those years, And so I did. I did like an 80 episode podcast series, which is out there on the internet, which is altogether, it's probably 120 hours long, where it is a deep dive examination of the history of this thing. I have the archives. Okay, we have the records, so we deep dived all of the stuff that they covered up and hid from us about the olden days, and then I've tried to, and I have at that same time I started to operate a little mission here this is the Mecca. This is the headquarters of the whole thing. The message right here where we live. The international headquarters is here, and there's thousands and thousands of message believers right here in this area. And I just tried to use, what I had available to me to share them the truth and offer a place for people to land, sort of maybe like a halfway house on the way out of the message. That's how I have looked at it. And I have done my best to do that. For the last, I guess about 2.5 years now. And focus on trying to show people where we went wrong and tell them the truth so they have an opportunity to wake up. And hey, Zacchaeus, I guess if they threw the money back at him and didn't want it, well, hey, maybe they don't want the truth, but I don't really have silver and gold have I none, but I can give you such as I have, give I thee, right? So I give you what I have to try and make it right.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've read the books, Charles, about like Something's Not Right by Wade Mullins. I think he gets into it. I believe Michael Kruger gets into it a bit in Bully Pulpit, if I'm not mistaken. But in books like that, they talk about a difference between a genuine apology. I know Wade does for sure, and Something's Not Right. The difference between a genuine apology and making amends versus like a concession. Or less, obviously, but because sometimes we don't even get that. But one of the markers of genuinely feeling repentant, and we see this biblically, I mean, this is what he's referencing, is that we desire to move forward differently, and we make a decision that we're going to move forward differently. And with that, we need to share what is true as loudly as we shared what was false, because we want it to reach as many of the people as possible who heard what was false. And so I'm adding a little bit of kind of my thoughts in there too. So none of that's a direct quote, but kind of putting all of that together. I don't know if you know that is a marker that like I would teach at beEmboldened. That's something I would teach to people, something that others talk about. And it's what you've done. It's exactly what you've done.
I appreciate that. I don't know that I've looked at it that way myself so much, but I appreciate that. I have tried. It's one thing to say the ideology was silly, but it wasn't, unless you can look at what we did in the name of that ideology and address that too, you really haven't got free of the cult, right? Because we were not a cult because we had a prophet who told us fake stories, right? That's not what made it a cult. It was a cult because of the system that harmed all of the people in the name of it, right? And unless you can understand, not just take apart these silly ideas, but what the reasoning and the way and why we did the things to the people in the name of those ideas, right? Because you can get rid of that ideology and just go apply that same abusive kind of behavior anywhere else, right? And what have you done? I mean, you've just changed from one prophet to another. You've just changed some ideology for another, and you're still harmful. You're still harming people, right? And, it's sad, but some people leave the groups like we did, and that's exactly what they do. And they're still harming people because they never really come to grips or terms with the fact that all the harm that they did in the name of the religion. And so the Apostle Paul said, if I build again that which I've destroyed, I'm become a transgressor. So you can tell, I'm indoctrinated with all this stuff, right? So like, I can't get away from these things in my head, right? Like, I mean, I live with this. Like, I think in Bible scriptures. I don't know. Or I think in Bible scriptures. I think in quotes. Like, we're drilled into this from childhood. Like, you cannot get away from it. So like, so I can't build again what I've destroyed, right? If you know what I mean. We've got to go a different way. And so, for me, I know I have enjoyed knowing you. I know we have been able to refer people to you that your group beEmboldened has been able to help, I have been so appreciative of that, because there are things that where we just we're in over our head, and so I appreciate the resource that you and the people that work with you are, and we're just trying to help people get away from the message and go find their way to something healthier and not build a new group, right? Halfway house. That's how I looked at it from the beginning. So,
yeah. Well, and Charles, I'm going to say this more so to those who are listening and watching, because I think it might be a little difficult for you to receive. So, y'all, I'm going to speak directly to you for a moment. Think about if your leader did or does do what Charles has done. Like, just imagine that for a moment. Like, if I sit here and I imagine, I'll use my dad as an example, though we had bosses at a Christian camp my husband worked for. We've kind of, between my husband and I, we've kind of had a buffet of what these experiences can look like. But I'll use my dad because, of course, that's the biggest experience in my life, the most significant one. And had he done what Charles has done, I really, truly believe I can say with pretty good confidence that at least the next 2 generations from him would be different right now. Potentially 3. And I don't know what it would look like from there. But to have someone who has said it themselves turn around and say, no, never mind, that is powerful in a way it's not powerful for someone else to say that they're wrong. There's just an impact that's going to carry in a different way, where everyone who's been following is going to hear, no, they're actually saying that it's wrong and never mind. Now, is everyone going to listen, especially if there's someone else chiming in their ear that, no, that person's now deceived? And not necessarily, but again, it gets our attention in a different way when someone says, you know what, I've been saying that, and I'm going to need to take that back because I've realized something new. I have new information now, and I'm reevaluating, and I'm going to have to change my stance, and I'm going to have to apologize to you for what I had said before. I now know differently, and I know better. And I want to apologize for any harm that's been caused. And in fact, I can list off the harm that I have caused. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to move forward differently now. And you're going to see that. You're going to get to see that that's genuine over time. It's hard for me to imagine. It chokes me up to think about if my dad had done that. Like if I got to hear that from him, the impact that it would have on me, on my life, and on my family. And so for Charles to take that stand and to come on here and have a conversation like this, where honestly mud could be slung at him. I don't think it's at all fair. I don't think it's at all founded because of, again, the change that has happened. But it's risky to do. And I want to acknowledge that. And I want to state it not only for appreciation of genuine repentance, which I believe the Lord can move us to. I want to say it for those of us who are so deeply discouraged right now by the lack of it that we're seeing in the church. And I'm talking in the mainstream church, as well as any of us who have connections with groups like this that would not be considered mainstream church. So for any of us who are like, oh my gosh, we're just so discouraged with how much we're seeing, like you used the word earlier, Charles, horror. And when we add it all up, I know where I sit in all the conversations I have in a week, I hear a lot of horror. And it can be incredibly discouraging. And so we have hope in Jesus that these transformations, used correctly, these happen. People do change, like lives are changed, lives are transformed, and hearts changed. And we can come to know truth. We can find truth, and we can have courage in him to step out and actually say it, to actually say, yeah, I was wrong. And I realize it now, and I'm going to say that. I'm going to actually share it. And it's just incredible because, again, we don't see it as often as we ought. And so I'm not trying to elevate Charles above anyone. I also want to recognize that this is what we should be seeing. And Charles, that's why I wanted you to come on. That's why I invited you on, because this is an example. Your story is an example of what is possible for those who are feeling hopeless. as well as an example of what should happen. We should see changes like this happening. And again, it is possible for them to happen. So with that, I'm wondering, as we close out our conversation today, how does this impact you as a father, as a husband, as a worker, as a friend? How has this shaped you in a way that maybe could be encouraging to those who are struggling today?
That's a good question. I have not a high opinion of myself. I get for all of it. It's kind of hard to. I think that I can teach my kids what not to do. I think that's probably one big thing. I can teach my kids what not to do. I can keep them safe. I can show them not to fall into the same trap. I can teach them to think critically, teach them that they can have faith in Christ, and that'll be enough for them. As it relates to other people around me, I tell you, I am a lot more open-minded than I used to be. And what I mean by that is there is a lot more liberty and grace for people than I once believed there to be. Mm-hmm. And so I have a lot more latitude towards my relationships than I once did. And so I think that's a good thing. And I'd say those are probably a couple big differences on this side of things. I really have a much more tolerant overall worldview.
Yeah, I was such a jerk.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if we would have gotten along or not.
No, you were going to hell. Sure. You were in a false sect of the message. You were an apostate.
Oh, you're right. You're right. No, you're right. Yeah, I didn't have a shot. Yeah. All right. There you have it. And I would have not, obviously I couldn't have associated with you because we didn't get to meet anybody else.
If I had known you, I probably would have used your name in a sermon and ran you down and told everybody, this is what happens when you're in another sect of the message. Like I would have, we were vicious. We thought nothing to destroy people and throw them away like trash. And we did all the time. And it was very sad, very unfortunate. Mm-hmm. And that's why some people killed themselves.
Charles, that was supposed to lead us into our ending. I just can't leave it there.
Okay, well, you can cut all that out.
That cannot. No, I'm going to leave it because it's kind of funny. Well, and on that note, thank you for joining us here at Reclamation today. Oh, my word. All right, we got to turn this around, everyone. We got to turn this around. What is one thing you want others to know about so they are better equipped to avoid similar pain? I know you spoke to your kiddos, but how about your kiddos? But how about anyone listening today?
All right, you have got to think for yourself. On this side of things, the one thing I tell most everybody who I get a chance to talk with is you are empowered to have your own relationship with God. You are empowered to look in the Bible and have your own decisions. You are empowered to make these choices yourself, right? The preacher is not the Holy Spirit. The preacher is not the voice of God to you. The preacher is not all of these things that we were told in our religion that we come from. They're just there to be a mentor and point you in the right way. But that's it. Don't let people rule and own you like that. And you can do that, right? You're free and you're empowered to think. And when you come to things that are challenging or you're looking your way through it, you can trust yourself to come to the right conclusions, and God will lead you personally to figure things out in the right way for you. And what he does is what's right for you. And so don't let the preachers control you. Don't let them destroy your lives. Don't let them tell you you're worthless, because if you have the Lord Jesus Christ, you're going to be okay, right? And that is what really counts. It's he's the one that matters. And so long as you got that, you're going to be just fine.
Thank you so much, Charles, for your vulnerability, your transparency, and just sharing your story in a way that really, I believe, brings hope. I know it does for me. It is a refreshing story to hear, as much as, aspects of it, of course, are very difficult to listen to. The ending, as in where we're at now, is incredibly encouraging to hear. And for our audience, if anything in this conversation has resonated with you and you'd like to learn more about these topics or beEmboldened services, please go to beEmboldened.com and subscribe here to get notified of our next episode. I'll see you soon.